The countdown had felt endless. For 2 weeks, I'd been going through the motions of my everyday life, just waiting for Sarah and Emma to come home. And when the plane finally landed, I could barely keep it together. I stood there at the airport with Mark, my brother-in-law, both of us trying to hide our excitement as we waited for Sarah and her sister to come through the gates. Liam and Sophie, my kids, her kids, were holding this big sign they'd made with colored markers and stickers, all shouting, "Welcome home, Mom." It was a goofy thing, but it made me smile. I'd been handling the house and the kids while she was away, just trying to keep everything together, but honestly, I was just waiting to see her. She had gone on a trip with Emma to Costa Rica. Sunshine, beaches, a little break from the brutal Minnesota cold. And sure, I understood the need for some time off, but it felt like the longest 2 weeks of my life. I kept thinking, this is it. Things will be back to normal soon. As the doors to the terminal slid open and the first passengers began spilling out, I caught sight of her. There she was, Sarah. And she looked different. Her hair was a little lighter, her skin a little darker from the sun. She was glowing, almost like she'd left behind the worn-out version of herself in Minnesota and stepped off that plane refreshed, a whole new person. I couldn't help but grin. "Mom! Mom!" Liam and Sophie squealed, running toward her. She bent down to hug them, her face lighting up, kissing them like she hadn't seen them in ages. But then, she turned to me. She had this look in her eyes, the kind of look that made me feel like everything was right in the world. She wrapped her arms around me, pulling me close, and whispered, "I missed you so much." For a second, I didn't care about anything else. It felt like we were back in our little bubble, like nothing could come between us. Her kiss was warm, soft. The whole airport could have been falling apart around me, and I wouldn't have noticed. But there was something odd, a little off. That night, after the kids were in bed and the house finally felt still again, Sarah excused herself to the bathroom. Her voice, light and teasing, floated back to me. "Get ready, I'll be right out." I was a little confused at first. I mean, we were just getting back from a vacation, nothing special. But Sarah had this way about her. She liked to keep things interesting, especially after being apart for a while. I didn't think much of it at first. But then she stepped out of the bathroom, and my breath caught in my throat. She was wearing that bathing suit she'd bought on their trip, the one she always joked about never looking good in. The one she used to say was too revealing, too flimsy. But standing there, with her skin glowing under the soft light, she looked stunning. "Do you like it?" she asked, spinning around. She sounded playful, but there was something else there. Something deeper. A challenge. A look in her eyes I didn't quite understand. Of course, I told her she looked amazing. The evening that followed, well, it was like old times. There was a tenderness, a closeness between us that I hadn't felt in a long while. And for a few hours, everything felt perfect again. I convinced myself that whatever tension had been building up in the last few weeks was just in my head. After all, we were reconnecting, weren't we? She was home. Things were going to be okay. But as we lay in bed, my thoughts refused to settle. There was this feeling in my gut, this nagging little voice that wouldn't shut up. It felt like a shadow lurking in the corner of my mind, making me second-guess everything. Was it really just the distance making her seem different? Or was something else going on? I didn't know then, but something was definitely off. And I wasn't sure if I was ready to admit it yet. The next few days after Sarah got back were weird. I don't know how else to describe it. On the surface, everything seemed fine. We slipped back into our routines. Sarah was back to making breakfast for the kids, laughing with them at the table, while I tried to catch up on work and take care of the yard. It wasn't like anything had changed, but there was this undercurrent, this feeling that something wasn't quite right. It wasn't even one big thing. It was the small stuff. Sarah was just a little too playful around me, as if she was trying a bit too hard to make up for the time we'd been apart. It wasn't her usual flirtatiousness. It was like a push to get things back to the way they used to be. It felt forced, like she was trying to rekindle something that had been gone for a while. And I'll be honest, I didn't know what to make of it. Was she just happy to be home? Was she really missing me that much? Or was she trying to cover something up? One evening, I was standing in the hallway, just sort of zoning out for a second, when I saw her in the kitchen. She was cleaning up after dinner, her movements graceful, like she wasn't even trying. She reached up to grab something from the top shelf, and the way her hips swayed as she stretched. I couldn't help it. I caught myself staring. I didn't mean to. It just happened. But as soon as she turned around, she caught me. "What's going on with you?" she asked, grinning. "You look like you've seen something you like." Her voice was teasing, light, but there was this flicker in her eyes. Something guarded. I froze. I couldn't figure out why, but something in her tone, the way she said it, sent a chill through me. It wasn't just playful. It felt like she was hiding something. Like she knew exactly what I was thinking. I tried to shake it off, but my mind was racing. Why did she seem so different? Why was she acting this way? It wasn't like her. She had always been affectionate, but this was something else. Almost like she was trying too hard. Like she was trying to get me to notice her. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The way she'd looked at me, that teasing smile, but also that distance behind her eyes, like she was holding something back. I kept telling myself I was overthinking it, but the more I thought about it, the more it didn't add up. Something felt off. I spent the next few days trying to ignore that nagging feeling in my chest, but it wasn't going away. It was like this constant ache in the back of my mind, just sitting there, growing louder every day. The weirdest part? I couldn't put my finger on why I was feeling this way. Nothing overt had happened. There were no big arguments, no major fights. But something about Sarah's behavior had shifted, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started noticing little things, stuff I had never cared about before. Like how she was always on her phone now. It wasn't like she was glued to it 24/7, but after the trip, she was suddenly posting all the time. Pictures of the beach, goofy shots with Emma, the typical vacation stuff. But then it kept going. Even after we got back, she was still posting constantly, interacting with old friends, liking photos, and leaving these comments that seemed different. Like she was trying to project this image of being carefree, like everything in her life was perfect. And maybe I wouldn't have thought twice about it if it wasn't for how she started acting when she was on her phone. She'd be scrolling, and then as soon as I walked into the room, she'd immediately lock it, close the app, or quickly switch screens. The first couple of times, I figured maybe she was just being private, but then it started happening more often. Every single time. I don't know why, but it made my stomach twist. I never thought of Sarah as secretive. Hell, she was the kind of person who would leave her phone on the counter with no second thought. But now it was like she was hiding something. Every time I saw her do it, that feeling in my gut got worse. I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just busy with work or reconnecting with old friends. But deep down I knew. It was the way she'd start deleting texts the second I walked into the room. Or how she'd lock her phone with a code now, something she never used to do. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, but the more I thought about it, the more it felt like a pattern. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. Sarah was on the couch, scrolling through Instagram or whatever, and I happened to glance over. Just for a second. And then I saw it. She got a message. One of those notifications that pops up on the screen. Normally, she would just read it and then close it. But this time, she opened it, looked at the screen for a second, and then immediately locked her phone. It wasn't just a random text. There was something about her reaction. The way she was so quick to hide it made me feel like I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The truth was right there in front of me, but I wasn't ready to face it. I wasn't ready to confront her, not without proof. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the doubt was taking root, and I didn't know how much longer I could ignore it. I'd been trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid, that maybe Sarah was just acting a little distant because of the stress of the trip, the kids, everything. But deep down I knew. I knew something wasn't right. The seeds of doubt I'd been planting in my mind were growing, and no matter how hard I tried to push them away, they kept creeping back. I started replaying everything in my head, every little interaction, every moment that seemed normal at the time but now felt wrong. It wasn't just the phone. It wasn't just the odd way she'd been acting around me. It was the whole vibe between us. There was this shift. A distance that hadn't been there before. Like we were still married, still going through the motions, but there was this wall that had gone up between us. And I couldn't help but wonder if she'd built it while she was away. One evening, I was in the garage, just mindlessly cleaning out the old boxes in the corner. It had been a long day. I was trying to distract myself, trying to focus on anything but the storm in my chest. But every time I thought I had my mind off it, the question came back. What if she's been unfaithful? The thought hit me like a ton of bricks. I hadn't wanted to go there. I hadn't wanted to believe it. But all the little signs were adding up. The secretive behavior, the strange messages, the way she'd been so distant when she came back from the trip. What if the truth was worse than I imagined? I stood in that garage for what felt like forever, just staring at the pile of junk in front of me, my mind spinning. What could I do if it was true? How would I confront her? Could I even trust my instincts? I didn't have any solid proof, just this gnawing feeling in my gut that wouldn't go away. Finally, Sarah called me from the house, breaking my trance. "Hey, what are you doing out there?" she asked. Her voice had that tone, the one that sounded just a little too innocent, like she could tell something was off with me. I hesitated for a second, unsure how to respond. I didn't want to say I was standing there wondering if my wife had been sleeping with someone else. So I lied. Just tidying up. Nothing big. She sounded a little confused, but she let it go. "Well, if you're not feeling good, we can just relax tonight. I'll make some tea for you." I didn't tell her the real reason I wasn't feeling right. I didn't want to bring it up, not yet. Not when I didn't have anything concrete to go on. But I couldn't escape the thought that maybe, just maybe, she had been hiding something from me. That night, I made the decision. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. But I also couldn't just confront her without knowing for sure. I wasn't going to accuse her without evidence. Not yet. I couldn't shake the idea of her being unfaithful. So, without her knowing, I started looking into things. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed answers. I wasn't going to let my gut feeling eat me alive. I started checking her phone when she wasn't looking, going through the texts, the calls, everything. The more I dug, the more I realized I was stepping into something dark. Something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I didn't know if I was doing the right thing. I didn't know if I was violating her trust, or if I was just trying to protect myself from the worst possible outcome. But the truth, whatever it was going to come out, and I needed to be ready for it. I spent the next few days doing what I told myself I wouldn't do. I had promised myself I wouldn't go snooping, wouldn't dig around and invade her privacy. But there I was, sitting in the kitchen while Sarah was taking a shower, scrolling through her phone like I was on some kind of mission. It felt wrong, like I was betraying her trust before she'd even done anything, but my instincts were screaming at me, and I couldn't shut them up. The first few times, it was just little things. A message here, a phone call there. Nothing that seemed like a smoking gun. But then, one night, as Sarah was getting ready for bed, I found it. A text message. Just a string of words on her phone that made my blood run cold. It wasn't the content of the message that bothered me. It was the timing. She had texted someone, a guy I didn't recognize, just hours before we'd gotten home from the airport. The message wasn't anything scandalous, but the tone was too familiar, too intimate. A few inside jokes, a compliment about how she looked at the beach, how she missed the spark they'd shared when they'd last hung out. I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't stop myself from reading it. I felt like I was drowning in the words. Missed the spark, huh? The truth hit me then, as clear as day. It wasn't just a weird feeling or a gut instinct. Sarah had been flirting with someone while she was on her vacation. That much was obvious. I don't care how she tried to spin it or how many excuses she'd make. There was something happening between them. Maybe nothing had happened yet. Maybe it was just harmless fun to her. But the way the conversation flowed, the comfort in the messages, the lack of hesitation, it was enough. I knew then that I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I had proof. But part of me didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to confront her with it. I didn't want to face what I was starting to realize, that she might have betrayed me while I was here, thinking she was on some relaxing vacation. I shut her phone off and put it back where I found it. She'd never know I'd looked. But I knew. And from that moment on, I couldn't unknow it. The next few days were a blur. I was walking around in a haze, going through the motions of normal life, but inside, I was falling apart. I couldn't look at Sarah the same way. Every time she smiled at me, kissed me, touched me, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe she'd done all of that for someone else while she was gone. Maybe that was why she seemed so different. I didn't say anything. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I kept my distance. I didn't want to be cold, but I couldn't pretend anymore. I needed to figure out what to do, what my next move was. I wasn't going to make a scene, but I wasn't going to let her get away with this either. I felt this weird calmness come over me. I don't know how else to explain it. It was like everything inside me was screaming, but I was just going to let it play out. Let it unfold the way it was meant to. If she was guilty, I'd confront her with the truth, with everything I knew. But if it was just a misunderstanding, if it was something that could be fixed, I'd give her the chance to explain. It was time to make a choice. Either walk away or face the storm head-on. I wasn't sure what I wanted yet, but I knew one thing. I was done pretending that things were okay. It's strange how you can live with something in your gut for so long, waiting for the right moment to confront it. I'd spent days circling around the truth like a vulture, watching for cracks, waiting for the right time to bring it all out in the open. The weird thing was, the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't need some dramatic moment. I didn't need to yell, or break anything, or even ask her for some big confession. I just needed her to admit what I already knew. That night, after the kids were in bed, Sarah and I found ourselves sitting in the living room together, the tension in the air thick enough to cut. She was scrolling through her phone, as usual, barely looking up as she absent-mindedly flipped through a few Instagram posts. Her hair was messy from a long day, her face flushed with exhaustion, but there was something else, something that was missing. It was like she was pretending everything was fine, like nothing had changed, but I could see through it. I wasn't sure how to start, but the silence between us was unbearable. I couldn't do this anymore. The nagging feeling was eating at me, and I had to ask, "Who's Ryan?" I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. She glanced up at me, her expression unreadable for a second. "Ryan," she echoed, like she hadn't even thought about it. "Why do you ask about him?" I sat back, trying not to sound too anxious, though my heart was thudding in my chest. "I saw his name in one of your texts. You said you missed the spark with him, that you'd had fun on your trip." Her face shifted, just a little, enough for me to notice. But she quickly masked it with a soft laugh. "Oh, come on, that's nothing. Ryan and I go way back. We were just messing around, you know? He's just a friend." "A friend?" "A friend who you texted late at night about missing sparks?" I wanted to call her out right there, wanted to demand the truth, but something stopped me. I was watching her, trying to read between the lines, looking for cracks in her story. She was good at this. She had gotten good at lying, at weaving stories to cover her tracks. It pissed me off, but it also made me realize I was in deeper than I thought. I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm, even though everything inside me was shaking. "You don't have to lie to me, Sarah. I already know something's off. Why are you acting like everything's normal?" Her eyes flickered for just a second, but she quickly recovered. She placed her phone down on the table and crossed her arms defensively. "I'm not lying. You're just overthinking everything. It was nothing, John. I swear." I studied her face, looking for any sign that she was being honest. There wasn't one. In fact, the more she spoke, the more I felt that weird, uncomfortable feeling crawling up my spine. It was like I was hearing her words, but none of it matched what was in my gut. My suspicion was growing with every word she said, but I couldn't just accuse her outright without more. I needed proof. "You're lying," I said, not loud but firm. "You're hiding something from me. Why can't you just tell me the truth?" She stiffened. I saw the flicker of guilt in her eyes before she quickly looked away. For a moment, I thought she was going to crack, but instead, she just shook her head, acting like I was being crazy. "John, I don't know what you want me to say. I'm tired. I just want to relax tonight. You're making a big deal out of nothing." I didn't buy it. I could feel my anger simmering just below the surface. I wanted to yell, to throw things, to make her understand how much this was hurting me. But I held it in, taking deep breaths, trying not to let her deflect me. I needed to stay in control. "Don't make me go through your phone, Sarah," I said, barely above a whisper. "I don't want to do that. I don't want to invade your privacy. But I will if I have to." Her face hardened. I could tell she was calculating, figuring out how to spin this, how to talk her way out of it. "You want to look through my phone? You really think that's going to help? It's not gonna change anything, John." I could feel the tension in my shoulders, the tightness in my chest. It felt like we were dancing around the truth, both of us avoiding it because it was too painful to face. But we couldn't keep doing this. I needed to know what happened while she was away. I needed her to either come clean or stop lying to my face. I didn't say anything else. I just stood up, walked over to the couch, and grabbed her phone from the coffee table. She didn't stop me. She didn't even try to grab it back. Instead, she just sat there, silent, her jaw clenched tight, her eyes avoiding mine. As I unlocked the phone, I could feel her watching me, but I didn't care. I had to see for myself. The phone felt heavier in my hands than it should have. I could feel Sarah's gaze on me, but I didn't care. At that moment, I was beyond caring about how she felt. I was doing what I had to do. I was digging for the truth. Her phone unlocked easily, her password nothing more than the default one she'd set ages ago. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, the noise deafening in my ears. I knew what I was about to find wouldn't be pretty, but I couldn't stop now. There was no turning back. I opened her messages first. I scrolled through them, my stomach twisting with every swipe. At first, it seemed like just the usual banter. Texts to her friends, a few things about the kids, a couple of updates about the trip. But then, I saw it. A message from Ryan. The same guy I'd seen earlier, the one who'd texted her about missing the spark. It was innocuous at first, just a simple, "Hey, how's your first day back?" But as I kept reading, my stomach dropped. The messages weren't what I expected. There was an intimacy to them, a kind of comfortable closeness that hit me harder than I thought it would. "You looked great in those beach photos, by the way. Still got it, huh? Miss the good times we had together. Feels like we could have picked up right where we left off." Then there was another message that made my blood run cold. "Wish I could have stayed. You were amazing to be around." I could feel my hands shaking as I held the phone. That was it. There was no denying it now. My wife had shared something with someone else, something I was supposed to have. And what was worse was how casual it all seemed. Like it was no big deal. Like their little flirtation meant nothing. I couldn't stop reading, even though I wanted to. Every message felt like a punch in the gut. There was no mistaking the tone. It wasn't just friendly. There was something more. It wasn't just words, it was the way they were talking to each other, like they shared some secret only they knew. I didn't have to be a genius to know that something had definitely happened between them. Maybe not physically, but emotionally? It was clear as day. My fingers were still moving, even though my mind was screaming at me to stop. I had to know. I had to know how deep it went. I scrolled up, and there it was. A message sent the night before she flew back home. "You and we're not done. I can't stop thinking about you." I froze. It was like the ground beneath me gave way. I felt dizzy, like the walls were closing in on me. I blinked, trying to force myself to comprehend what I was reading. Did she actually just say that? Did she just say that? I couldn't even look at Sarah right now. I didn't need to see her face. I didn't need to hear her excuses. I already had the proof. She had been emotionally invested in someone else. She had crossed a line. And now I had the confirmation that I wasn't crazy. That feeling I'd had deep down was real. I slowly set her phone down on the table, not knowing what to do next. I was numb. I was so angry, but the anger felt distant. It wasn't the kind of anger that made you shout or break things. It was the kind of anger that hollowed you out. The kind that made your heart feel like it was bleeding out but didn't know how to stop it. I finally looked up at Sarah. She was sitting there, tense as a wire, her eyes darting between me and the phone. She knew. She knew what I had just found. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. Then, in a voice that was too calm, too controlled, she spoke. John, I couldn't hear it. I couldn't listen to the lies anymore. Don't try to explain. I know what's been going on. Sarah's face paled, and I could see the guilt flash across her eyes. For a split second, she didn't even know what to say. Then, like a mask slipping back into place, she finally spoke. I didn't mean for it to happen, John. It was just a connection. He's been a part of my life for so long, and I didn't know how to tell you. The words hit me like a slap in the face. I could feel myself retreating, pulling back into myself, trying to block out everything she was saying. It didn't matter anymore. The excuses didn't matter. You didn't know how to tell me? I echoed. You didn't know how to tell me that you've been flirting with some guy behind my back? That you've been texting him about how you missed the spark? I took a deep breath, trying not to choke on my own words. You didn't know how to tell me that you've been emotionally involved with him while I was here, keeping things together with the kids? Her face crumpled. She opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. The silence between us felt heavier than anything she could have said. It was like all the years we'd spent together had suddenly disappeared into nothingness. I couldn't do this. I couldn't hear the rest of her excuses. I didn't need to. You're not the woman I married, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know who you are anymore. And with that, I stood up and walked out of the room. I didn't look back. I didn't want to. The days after that conversation felt like I was walking through some kind of nightmare, each step dragging me deeper into a reality I wasn't sure I could face. I don't think either of us knew what to do next. Sarah didn't try to stop me when I walked out of the room that night, but she didn't leave either. She stayed in the living room, probably trying to figure out how to fix it, but I wasn't interested in her explanations anymore. The trust was shattered, and that was something that couldn't just be glued back together. I slept on the couch for the next few nights. I didn't want to be in the same bed with her. Hell, I didn't even want to be in the same house. But I stayed for the kids. I had to stay for them. Liam and Sophie had no idea what was going on. To them, their mom and dad were still the same. Just two people who loved each other. But I wasn't sure if I could keep pretending anymore. The tension in the house was unbearable. Sarah barely spoke to me. She avoided eye contact, as if we were strangers. The little things, the small gestures that used to be a part of our routine, like her kissing me goodbye in the morning or holding my hand on the couch, were gone. All that was left between us was this thick, suffocating silence. She tried talking to me a few times, but I wasn't in the mood for her half-hearted apologies. I wasn't in the mood for anything she had to say. I knew what had happened. I knew who she was now. The person I thought I was married to? She was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone who was capable of lying to my face and betraying my trust. That Sunday, she finally broke the silence. We were sitting at the kitchen table, both of us trying to get through breakfast without completely falling apart. Liam was playing with his Legos, Sophie was picking at her pancakes, and Sarah was nervously stirring her coffee. John, she said, her voice quiet, hesitant. We need to talk about this. I'm sorry. I know I've hurt you. But I'm not just going to walk away from our marriage like it's nothing. I looked at her. Her face was pale, eyes red-rimmed from not sleeping, and there was this desperation in her voice, like she was searching for something. An answer, a way to fix everything. I don't know if I can believe you anymore, Sarah, I said. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. The pain was too raw. You've been lying to me. You've been texting that guy behind my back, talking about things that should have never been shared with anyone but me. I can't just pretend it's all okay. I can't just forget it. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away before she could touch me. It felt like I would break if she laid her hand on me. She was a stranger now. I know I fucked up, she said, her voice breaking. But I swear to God, I didn't sleep with him. I didn't. It was just a connection, a moment of weakness. I didn't want it to happen, but it did. I never meant to hurt you. I swear, I didn't want to lose you. I looked at her, waiting for more, waiting for her to say something, anything that would make me believe her. But there was nothing else. Just empty words. I could hear the sincerity in her voice, but it didn't change the fact that she'd crossed a line. She couldn't take back what she'd done. I leaned back in my chair, running my hand through my hair. I don't know what to do, Sarah, I whispered, more to myself than to her. I don't know if I can get past this. I don't know if I can look at you the same way. And I don't know if I even want to try. She started to cry then, soft sobs that broke my heart. But I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I couldn't be the one to console her, not when she had destroyed everything I thought we had. It wasn't just about her lying. It was about the fact that she thought it was okay to let someone else in. To let someone else be close to her in a way that was supposed to be mine. You don't get it, do you? I said, my voice shaking. You broke me, Sarah. I can't look at you the same way anymore. Her sobs grew louder, but I just couldn't care. It wasn't that I didn't feel for her. It wasn't that I wanted to see her suffer. It was that I had already suffered, and she hadn't even tried to stop it. I stood up, walking toward the door. I needed air. I needed space. I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. Every corner felt like a reminder of what had happened. Where are you going? Sarah asked, her voice breaking through the tears. I need some time, I said, my back turned to her. I need time to think. I spent the rest of the afternoon walking around town, aimlessly at first, but then I found myself outside of a small park. It wasn't far from our house, but it felt like a world away. I sat down on one of the benches, letting the cool autumn breeze bite at my skin. My mind was racing. No matter how much space I tried to put between myself and Sarah, the images, the words, the betrayal kept flooding my thoughts. What the hell was I supposed to do now? What was left of our marriage? We had built a life together. Kids, memories, laughter, and now it was all crumbling in front of me. I wasn't even sure if I could look at her the same way anymore. Every time I tried to remember the woman I married, all I could see was the lie. I was lost in thought when I heard a voice. John? I looked up, startled. Standing a few feet away, looking more uncertain than I'd ever seen her, was Sarah. She was dressed in a light sweater and jeans, her eyes puffy from crying, but there was a fire in them now, something desperate. Sarah, I exhaled, half surprised, half exhausted. What are you doing here? I had to talk to you, she said, her voice shaking. You're avoiding me. You're avoiding everything, and I can't just sit there pretending it's fine. I can't lose you. I stood up, not sure what to do. My hands were clenched into fists at my sides. I didn't want to feel sorry for her. I didn't want to listen to her apologies. I was past that point. I was at the part where I had to decide whether or not I could keep going in this mess. But the look in her eyes, the same look that had once made me fall in love with her, made me hesitate. You're right, I said, my voice cold. I've been avoiding you. Because every time I look at you, all I see is what you did. All I see is how you lied to me and hurt me. You think I can just forgive that? You think I can just move on? She shook her head, stepping closer. I don't expect you to just forgive me. I don't expect anything. But I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't want to betray you. It was a mistake. I was just lost. We were drifting, and I felt so alone sometimes. And then Ryan came along, and I didn't know how to stop. But it didn't mean anything, John. It didn't mean anything. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. It didn't mean anything? You've been texting him for weeks, sharing all these personal things, talking about how much you missed him, how we weren't done. And you're telling me it didn't mean anything. She flinched at my words, but there was no denying it. She had crossed a line I could never unsee. I could feel my anger rising, but I tried to keep it under control. Yelling wouldn't fix this. Yelling wouldn't fix anything. But the hurt, it was still there. So much of it. I was weak, she said, tears welling up in her eyes again. I don't know what happened, John. I thought about us, about everything we've built, and I realized that I messed up. I hate myself for what I did. I don't want to lose you. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air into my lungs. You already lost me, Sarah, I said quietly. You lost me the moment you started lying to me. The moment you let someone else take the place I should have had in your heart. She stepped forward, her hands trembling, but I took a step back. I couldn't let her touch me. I couldn't let her pretend that everything was fine, that a few words of apology would magically make all of this disappear. "I'm sorry, John," she whispered, her voice raw. "I'm so sorry. Please. I'll do anything to fix this. We can work through it, I swear. Please, just give me a chance to make it right." I closed my eyes, trying to push down the wave of emotion that was threatening to drown me. I didn't know what to feel anymore. She had hurt me in a way that went deeper than anything I could have imagined, and yet, there was a part of me that still wanted to forgive her, that still remembered the good times, the love we had. But it wasn't enough. I opened my eyes and looked at her. There was so much I wanted to say, but none of it seemed to matter now. There was no going back from this. "I can't just pretend everything's okay," I said, my voice steady but strained. "I can't just forget what you did. And I'm not sure I can ever trust you again." Her face crumpled, and she finally let out the sob I'd been hearing in bits and pieces over the past few days. "Please, John, don't give up on us." But I had already made up my mind. "I don't know what we have left, Sarah," I said quietly. "I don't know if we can fix this." The words hung in the air between us, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. There was nothing more to say. Not yet. I turned and walked away, the sound of her crying fading behind me as I left her standing there. It took me a couple of weeks to really wrap my head around everything. I couldn't pretend like things were normal. I couldn't walk around acting like I wasn't constantly questioning every little thing Sarah said or did. Every time she smiled, I wondered if it was real, or if it was just part of the act she'd been playing to make me believe in her again. I wasn't stupid. I knew what she'd done. And it didn't just hurt my pride. It hurt everything I thought I understood about us. But life doesn't wait for you to heal. The kids needed me. They couldn't see their world fall apart. I didn't want to ruin their lives just because Sarah had decided to screw everything up. So I kept going. Day by day, I went through the motions, trying to keep things as stable as I could for them. I didn't have all the answers, but I had to find some way to deal with it. Sarah and I barely spoke at first. She'd still try, here and there, to apologize or to get close to me, but I wasn't ready for it. She wasn't ready for it either, not really. Every time she reached out, I could feel the space between us growing wider. She wasn't the woman I thought she was. I kept telling myself that. And yet, there were times, quiet moments in the kitchen, while I was doing the dishes, or when the kids were at their soccer games, when I missed her. I missed her laugh. I missed her touch. I missed the person who used to be my partner in everything. But I also knew something had changed. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, Sarah came into the living room while I was sitting on the couch, flipping through the channels. She hesitated before speaking, as if testing the waters. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, "about us. About everything. And I understand if you can't forgive me. I need you to know how sorry I am." I didn't look at her. My mind was still too clouded, too full of anger and hurt. "You've apologized enough," I said, my voice flat. "It doesn't change anything." She stood there for a long time, silent. I could feel her staring at me, but I didn't turn to face her. I couldn't. It was like if I did, it might pull me back into the mess we'd created together. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," she finally said. "I know I don't deserve it. But I'm asking for another chance. I want to rebuild this, John. I want to show you that I can be the woman you deserve." Her words felt like a weight on my chest, but I didn't know what to do with them. I couldn't just forgive her because she was asking. I couldn't go back to the way things were, not after everything that happened. But then something shifted. Maybe it was the quiet desperation in her voice, or the way her shoulders slumped when I didn't respond. Whatever it was, I felt a shift inside me. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, anyway. But maybe it was acceptance. Maybe it was finally understanding that the person I thought I knew was gone, and that I had to decide who I wanted to be moving forward. "I don't know if we can rebuild this," I said, my voice lower now. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again. But I'm willing to try. For the kids. For us." Sarah's breath caught, and she finally stepped closer, sitting down on the couch beside me. She didn't touch me, but her presence was there, close enough that I could feel her warmth. "I'll do whatever it takes, John," she whispered. "Whatever it takes." I nodded slowly. "I don't know if that's enough," I said, shaking my head. "But we'll figure it out. And maybe, just maybe, we would." It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be smooth. We still had a lot of work to do, and a lot of hard conversations ahead of us. But we had a choice, to keep going, or to let everything fall apart completely. It wasn't a decision I could make for her, and it wasn't a decision she could make for me. It had to come from both of us. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a tiny flicker of hope. Not for the way things had been, but for the way they could be, if we both put in the effort and if we both worked at it. And with that, the story ends. Sometimes life doesn't give you the perfect resolution, the neat ending, or the fairy tale that makes everything okay. But it does give you choices. And it's those choices that, in the end, determine who you become. I can't say what happened after that. I don't know if Sarah and I will make it through this. But I do know that I'm no longer the same guy I was before. I've been through hell and back, and I'm not the one who gets to choose what happens next, but I'll be ready for it, whatever it is. Thank you for watching this video to the end. What did you like most about this story? Write your answers in the comments. See you in the next video.